Well, let's continue the conversation into the state of this campaign. David Coletto is the founder and the CEO of Abacus Data. He's here to share his analysis of where things stand right now. David, thanks for coming to studio.
Good to be here, Michael. Thanks.
So listen, let's begin with your top numbers because, you know, like other pollsters, you have the Conservatives and the Liberals essentially around the 40% mark. But yours stands out because you actually have the two parties in a tie right now at 39%. So where is this race competitive right now?
So it's competitive in many parts of the country. I mean, when you look at that top line number, you see where the Conservatives have been strong for pretty much ever, strong in the prairies. It's very competitive in British Columbia. We've got the Conservatives only ahead by 4 there. In Ontario, our most recent numbers has the Liberals ahead by a handful of points. And so a lot of that is driven by what's going on in those two regions. But what's interesting is when you dig a little deeper and you look at those who are most motivated to vote, we actually have the Liberals slightly ahead. And that's an interesting dynamic in this election that's different from in the past, in that Liberal supporters are more excited, more engaged than Conservative ones, which has been the reverse for much of the last, I would say, 10 years, really.
Yeah, well, and does that surprise you, given the fact that Conservatives were, as recently as, you know, December of 2024, really motivated to come out and vote?
It's a complete mind shift, right, where I think it would have been hard-pressed to find a Liberal who was willing to admit they were a Liberal in December, and today they are raising their hands and want people to know, I think, a few things. One, we've had a change in leadership. Justin Trudeau was unpopular, even not loved among his own supporters. You have Mark Carney, who is getting quite a bit of goodwill, which I know we'll talk about in a minute, but it's really Donald Trump. It's this new threat and the new set of issues that has animated Canadians, generally speaking, but has really, I think, caused those that are most concerned about Donald Trump, most concerned about the threat of him, to really navigate or gravitate towards Mr. Carney and the Liberals. And they're motivated because they feel threatened, but they're also very much patriotic. And that spirit that I think Trump has inadvertently created in all of us is at this point helping the Liberals politically. Yeah, helping the Liberals politically. Although I think what's interesting to note is that you actually don't believe the Conservatives should be necessarily changing their message to Donald Trump, though. And I think why that's interesting is there is right now pressure on the Conservative campaign to refocus, to speak more about Donald Trump. But you don't think that would actually help out Pierre Poilievre right now? I don't. I think you know, if I look at the scenario that's facing the Conservative campaign right now, they've been dealt a pretty tough hand, right? Despite the fact that they're still polling pretty well, relatively speaking. They could lose and still get 39% of the vote. And it's in part because when you look at the polling data that I see, Mark Carney and the Liberals are so far ahead on who Canadians think would best handle Trump that if you make this election entirely about that, you're basically ceding the ground to the Liberals, right? Because on paper, the things that Mark Carney represents to people, his experience, the fact that he isn't a politician or hasn't been one for very long, are all sources of strength right now. And Pierre Poilievre, in comparison, doesn't perform as well. So my sense is they have to make it about it's not going to be about something entirely else, because Trump is going to continue to insert himself and he is on people's minds. But the Conservatives are much more likely to win this election if more voters go into that ballot box thinking about affordability, thinking about housing, thinking about change. So that was why I thought, you know, if they lean in entirely, it's probably a dead end. That they might make them feel good, but does it increase the likelihood they can win the election? I'm not convinced. Okay, so that's the Conservative camp. I want 2 more questions here, quickly running out of time, though. So a quick answer, if you will. What about the NDP? Because your polling numbers don't say great things for what lies in store for that party right now. Well, I think the NDP also don't want this election to be about Trump for the same reason, but more acutely because Jagmeet Singh's having a very hard time inserting himself and making the NDP relevant in this conversation. So they, too, would much rather talk about the price of groceries or housing or the idea that Mark Carney and the Liberals don't deserve another term because they aren't progressive enough. They aren't going to stand up to those issues. And so as much as Pierre Poilievre wants this to be about something else, I think so too does Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats. Okay, so their best bets are to essentially try to shift focus of the debate or the choice for people. But talk to us about how people feel about the individual leaders, because that has to be in play right now in the background when people make their choice. It is, and you know, Mark Carney, even in now the second week of the campaign, hasn't seen his negatives go up, right? He's been almost untouched by this campaign so far. More people have a positive view of him than a negative one, which is rare in any politician these days. And in contrast to him, Mr. Poilievre's negatives are rising, slowly, but rising and moving in the direction you don't want it to see. And Mr. Singh finds himself at a point in this campaign where he's the least popular of the three main party leaders, which was not the case in the last two federal elections. Jagmeet Singh could always at least count on some goodwill among voters that may not have converted into votes all the time, but at least that was there. He doesn't have that. So Mark Carney has the advantage in terms of how people think about him generally, and on the things that I think matter today. Who do you think is best able to deal with Trump? Who do you think is going to guide the country through this storm or stand up to a bully? On all of those, Mark Carney beats Pierre Poilievre by a significant margin, and that gap is growing over the campaign, not shrinking, which is why I think the Liberals are seeing the momentum in the polls that we see and are feeling optimistic still in these early days of the campaign.
Yeah, early days. Only week 1 has passed. We're now into, I think, day 10 of the campaign, so watching it very closely. Listen, always appreciate the time, David. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Michael.